Hello, Jim Howard here in Fort Worth, Texas. Today's date, it's May 23rd, 2011. Wanted to comment on, let me get this microphone adjusted a little bit here. Wanted to comment on the storm situation and give you a little perspective. I'm in Florida, or I don't even know where I am. I'm in Texas, but I always seems funny to say I spent all my life in Missouri, because I didn't spend all my life in Missouri. But I guess I can say I spent all my adult life. And Missouri is part of Tornado Alley. And recently, it's really strange. The storm situation and the tornado situation. The nation here, United States, is having, we've had, I think, a trend of the Weather Bureau has gotten so, good at that they're giving, forecasts that are longer range. The forecasts are better, and of course we have better ways to disseminate the information and get it out to people and to warn people. And I believe that the tornado deaths have, gone down, and well, just a year or two ago, it was pretty much standard. You could have a tornado hit an area, and because of the warnings given by the Weather Bureau, you'd see on television a community smashed, and it'd say, nobody died or one fatality. And now, recently, we're having these massive storms. They seem larger than our normal storms we're getting. Seems like we're having more of them, the tornadoes, and we're definitely having a tremendous spike. What was it so far? Is it 86 in Joplin, Missouri, from the tornado that hit there? I'm sure that there's going to be scientific study done and come up with some type of, I don't think that global warming has anything to do with that, but I don't know. But it really seems strange that all of a sudden we're having so many storms on multiple days. The storms seem to be wider, bigger, stay on the ground, like just everything. And then the number of deaths. I always like to give you a little perspective from my point of view, which I don't have any scientific, no matter what the subject that I talk about here, I like to kind of give it to you from whatever my perspective is, which is, it's never being an expert, and it's never being, but it's just a little perspective of a situation, so you kind of get some, kind of background of some of these situations. I hated school for some reason, and I took every chance I could to avoid school. And I went to a Catholic military high school, and they were strict, and they sent, you had homework, and I carried my books home with me every day, and I opened them. I didn't even, I just carried them back and forth. Why I carried these ton of books back and forth, I don't know, because I didn't open them. I didn't want to go to school, but I was engaged in outside activities that had nothing to do with the school. And I was in civil defense in Kansas City, Missouri. This is back in the 50s, early 60s. And at the civil defense meetings, this is for an entire city, Kansas City, Missouri, if we had 15 or 20 people show up for the civil defense meeting, that we were civil defense. If they would show up, that would be a good meeting. Meanwhile, people were concerned about, nuclear war, and people were building fallout shelters, and so we didn't get anybody showing up for civil defense meetings to speak of. I was also in what was the Ground Observer Corps, the GOP. It was an affiliate of the U.S. Air Force, and for Kansas City, Missouri, which is in the heart of the United States, we would stand post, and the post was on top of the Army Records Center. So we got access to the military base, and then to the building, and then they had built, or we had built, up on top. You went up on the roof, and then you climbed up this ladder, and there was this little area there where you could watch for enemy aircraft. And you reported all aircraft. So when you saw an aircraft, you would pick up the phone and you would dial the operator, and you would say, "Aircraft flash." And our calls, here I was a high school kid, our calls took, priority over just about everything, and they connected us with Air Defense Command. If they have to unplug somebody and plug the governor or somebody, our calls went through, and we reported, I forget exactly, we'd say aircraft flash, and then can't remember the exact procedure, but this is post LK20 red. We have one X number of feet. Can't remember, north, northwest, or whatever, and we give the the information, very briefly, information. I don't know if you can hear the hail or not outside. It's raining, and there's hail hitting the windows. But I think we all always thought, if we see Russian bombers in the heart of America over Kansas City, Missouri, it's kind of late. I think the people who were north of us, and the people in Canada and whatever, who were part of Ground Observer Corps or whatever it was called in Canada, I think they probably felt a little more. I think we kind of felt like, well, if we see a Russian bomber over the middle of the United States, it's a little late to be calling it in. I think they already would know it. Finally, with radar and what have you, of course they'd had radar since World War II, but the improvement of radar and the dew line and all this type of stuff, the Air Force decided that the Ground Observer Corps was no longer needed, and did this. And I may not be correct. We were told that anyway. They said, okay, what we're going to do is the civil defense is you're going to become weather observers for Kansas City, Missouri, and you'll report tornadoes. And they gave us the training. And until that time, it was sort of, somebody called in and said, I saw a tornado, and you had a lot of this. Any cloud, you'd have people calling in. And they knew that was a problem because they had untrained people looking up and, I see a tornado, And then you had police officers, would call in on the radio, I saw him. They really hadn't been trained, I don't think, either. We were told we were the first trained weather observers. Now, I find it hard to believe that it was, in the early 60s or something before they actually trained weather observers, but that's what we were told. So then we watched for tornadoes. Later in life, I was a volunteer fireman for a little bit. Actually, I went through the training, and then at the same time I became a reserve police officer with a small town. And so I didn't do too much of it. But the fire department would go out and they'd watch, and then also, of course, the police officer. And then, of course, I worked hospital security for 30 years, and we had, depending on the hospital and the situation, we had to watch for, severe weather, and we had to, depending on how this hospital had different policies, but you'd have to, maybe inform the house supervisor that we needed to go into code gray and do whatever was required for that. I worked at a hospital, Lee Summit Hospital, and I was working there. I worked there a year. I was there when a microburst hit, which at first it was reported as a tornado. It didn't hit the hospital, but hit just a short distance away in a residential area. I'd never heard of the term microburst before. But in all these years, and I'm 70 years old, I've never actually seen in real life a tornado. I also have really never been afraid of them, but I know that's not courage, it's sort of stupidity. I'm sure if one ever, comes around me. I've seen the devastation afterwards. Kansas City, Missouri had one in the Ruskin area of Kansas City, Missouri, and that was a pretty bad one. I forget the exact number, 40 or 50 people I think died. It shook up Kansas City, Missouri pretty good. So this was back, I think, in the early 60s, maybe late 59, 58, 57, I'm not sure. But I can't imagine now, after these big tornadoes that have been hitting recently, these communities are going to be really traumatized with these deaths. And for the longest time, anytime the weather gets bad, there's going to be people paying attention, which, going out looking to see, and it's going to be really, they're going to suffer some trauma. In Joplin, this storm that hit last night or yesterday, it hit the hospital. They have two hospitals there. It hit the hospital, and it sounds like the hospital's been totally evacuated and pretty much destroyed. I know in Missouri there was, I don't know if it was a Ruskin tornado or not, but there was a hospital, I think, in Missouri that took the blunt of a storm. Like I said, I worked 30 years hospital security, and hospitals have procedures for everything. They have procedure manuals in every department, and new employees have to know these procedures, or at least where to look them up. And what I've found in every, and I must have worked at 6 or 7 different hospitals over the years. What I found with these hospital disaster plans, and they have, the plan is drawn up, it's not just, the hospital isn't stupid enough to think that, okay, nothing's going to happen to the hospital, so our disaster plan is just strictly what to do with casualties when they come in, and how to handle, the hospital has a plan for if the hospital, loses water or loses electricity, or if there's rioting in the area. I mean, they have plans for everything. But what I found and complained about when I was working at the hospitals, and they never really paid any attention to me. I was kind of vocal in my career of working in hospital security. I wasn't shy about confronting authority, and whether it was my boss or whether it was, a hospital administrator. But what I found with these hospital disaster plans, they're always written, and I bet it's the same for other industries. The 9/11 building, or airports and everything, probably. But these with hospitals, let me talk about that. They write these disaster plans on the assumption that the disaster is going to happen Monday through Friday, 9 a.m. to 5 p.m. And so if you're working at the hospital, what I've run into, I worked at a smaller hospital, which was set up by, the main center, the Research Medical Center, 500-bed hospital in a small town, Belton, Missouri. They set up a hospital with about 50 beds. So they took the disaster plan for the 500-bed hospital, where you have a security department of 30 or 35, and they just take the disaster plan out to the small hospital. They say, here is your disaster plan. And so at the small hospital I worked at, we had, for a while, I was the only security officer they had, and then at the peak we had 2 security officers, and there was nobody working security during the daytime. We just worked, at night. And it's, like I said, there was, and when I say 2, I don't mean 2 on duty at the same time. I mean, there for a while I worked 5 days. I worked 4 days a week, and another guy worked 3 days a week. I worked 2 12s and 2 8-hour shifts. But anyway, at the small hospital, they took the disaster. So for the small hospital, when you opened up the disaster plan, it would say, in the event of riot or whatever happens, it would say, okay, one security officer will take radios and go to the emergency room and contact the head ER doctor. One security officer will respond to the main entrance of the hospital. One security, and there, it was like for the plan for a small hospital, for the radiological, for the part of the plan that said that was to cover in case there was a nuclear incident of some sort. And I think mainly it was, say, a truck carrying radioactive waste or something overturns and spills. And that, it said the security officer will respond to the radiology department and get the Geiger counter and take the Geiger counter to the emergency room and give it to the radiological control, By the way, when I was in the civil defense also in Missouri, I was trained as a radiological monitor. So I was trained how to use Geiger counters and take readings and all that kind of stuff. Kind of interesting. All this training I had over all the years. Also, I'm an amateur radio operator, so they have a thing called Skywarn, where amateur radio operators, watch for tornadoes, and very sophisticated, and using radios to communicate with the weather department and everything. But it was kind of interesting because I had all this training since I was a teenager, and at the hospitals I worked at, every year I would have to, you have to watch this videotape on tornadoes, and you have to sign off on this saying that you watched the videotape. And we would take videotape machine around to security, that's what we did, to the various departments, and screen the video, for them or whatever. But here I had all this training, and I remember one year I didn't sign the thing that I watched the video or whatever, and my supervisor was, you've got to, I mean, I could have been doing the training for everybody. But remember one time going to work at this Research Belton Hospital, and I went to work. It was when I came in, I guess, because it was 6 p.m., so it was either Saturday or Sunday. And I come in and it's daylight, and the sun is shining, but there's clouds up there, and the head ER nurse had come outside, and she was looking up at, normal clouds or whatever. She said, "A tornado, that's a tornado." I said, "No, it's not a tornado." "Yes, it's a tornado, it's a tornado." Because sometimes you get these little part of a cloud that hangs out, But anyway, where I was talking about the radiological thing. There was no at this hospital. There was no Geiger counter in the in the X-ray department at that small hospital. So they have these plans drawn up, and it's always Monday through Friday, 9 to 5. And I don't know of any disasters that have ever happened Monday through Friday, 9 a.m., and the plans, these things happen on a weekend, or seem like they happen at night. And these plans for the hospitals always say, when such and such an emergency and the hospital goes into disaster phase, such and such, the hospital administrator will open up the command center at such and such a location. Unless there's damage in that area, then he opens it. He opens up, and the department heads will each respond there to the command center to be there, and and then so and so employees will respond, and they will be messengers, and the hospital. The small hospital I worked at, there was, at night, an ER doctor, and for the longest time, it was an RN in the emergency room and an LPN. And X-ray was on call. Then later we got an X-ray tech around the clock. And there was a lab tech who was on and then there was me. That was the people who were on the first floor of the hospital. On the second floor of the hospital, there were two or three nurses on the nursing unit. There was an ICU unit that held 5 patients, but a lot of times there weren't any patients there, so it was closed and there was no nurse. If there was a ICU, there would be, patients. There'd be 1 or 2 nurses there. And that was the entire staffing for the hospital. But yet you had the disaster plan that said, when such and such happens, it was, and that's the way these plans are for these hospitals. It pissed me off big time, and I let people know about it. At the small hospital that I worked at, I remember one time that we were having, at the small hospital we were having, it was an unusual night. I mean, there are lots of times we were busy, really busy, and patients, on all the beds in the emergency room and on carts. And this night we had four ambulances there and the helicopter. And like I said, the staffing was, 2 nurses in the emergency room. The RN was in charge of the hospital at night. She was an RN, and she was the acting hospital administrator. So we had these 4 ambulances there. The helicopter was sitting there, getting ready, I think, to take somebody out. I don't think it brought somebody in. I think it was getting ready to transport somebody. It was out there running. And the fire alarm system went off, and the ER nurse, the RN, said to me, "Jen, we're too busy. Don't pay any attention to that." And of course, I didn't say. I just said, "Okay." And then I took care of it. I just went ahead and took care of the situation. So the fire alarm system went off. I had to respond to a panel and find where, look to see what was lit up. I also needed to silence the fire alarm system, not reset it, but silence it. Not reset it then, I would reset it later. But I needed to silence the bell, which was really loud. I also needed to unlock doors so that the fire department, who would be responding, could get into the doors. And then, of course, I needed to, go to the scene of the fire. I had to determine by looking at where it is showing up. And then I needed by radio. I was on the frequency with the police department, which was also the dispatch. I needed to, as soon as I could, let them know. So when they were responding, what to expect and where the fire was. and I needed to go to the scene of the fire to, if there was a fire, put out the fire or evacuate people or do whatever was necessary. So all these things had to be done at once. And so I went ahead and took care of what had happened, and which I sort of suspected immediately was the helicopter outside running. The fumes from the engine got sucked in and set off the fire alarm system. But my God, we're at 25 minutes, and I have a dozen more stories to tell you about. I'll just say that I worked at one hospital where in Kansas City, Missouri, where a tornado set down, and now it seemed like, but this tornado, it wiped out, I think, a gas station or whatever, then lifted up, but it was heading towards, and so I'm looking at the situation on the television or getting it on the radio or whatever, and the tornado is heading towards our hospital. But there's St. Luke's Hospital and Research Hospital and Baptist Hospital and other hospitals, in between us. And then there was Trinity Lutheran Hospital, and then right behind us was St. Mary's Hospital. So anyway, I call up the house, that hospital. You had a house supervisor around, at night there was a nurse, an RN, who was in charge. Because the administrators, the CEO, and the department heads and people weren't there. So I assessed the situation. You got to remember, I got a little bit of also training in this area, even, since I was in high school. And so I call up the house supervisor and say, we got this situation, blah, 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 blah. And I said, we need to go into code gray. And she said, no, I don't want to do that. And I said, no, this storm, it's touched down at state line and such and such, and it's reported to be heading this direction. We need to go into code gray, right away. No, I don't want to do that, because then later, when nothing happens, then later we would have to page that it was all clear with a public address system, and that would wake up the patients, and I don't want to do that. And I tried to be persuasive and say, well, ma'am, no, we're not going to do it. The next day, all the hospitals, all of them, except for Trinity Lutheran Hospital, even the hospital behind us, the newspaper reported, and on the TV they reported, it went into their, weather emergency status or whatever, and our hospital did not. So now at the hospital, Lee Summit Hospital, when I worked there, when the microburst, I was working there again, this situation of one security officer, and I was looking, and I went and checked the weather outside, and the rain was coming down. It was just coming down. It was unbelievable that it was coming down. And this man came to pick his wife up, switchboard operator. He came to pick his wife, real nice people. He came to pick her up. And he came, of course, he was sopping wet. He came in, and he said, have you seen the rain? And I said, yeah, I saw it. It's coming down. And he said, well, have you seen it? I just seen it like 2 minutes ago, He says, it's going sideways. I said, what? So I went over, and the rain was, I never seen it. The rain was going sideways. And then I heard on the radio, I had the local, I had my ham radio with me, and I heard the dispatcher, all the dispatcher said was tornado, I think it was tornado west Lee Summit. That was it. No other, And I went and told the switchboard operator, I said, call the house supervisor. We need to go into code gray right now. And so she called her, and then the house supervisor said, was talking to told the switchboard operator, no, have Jim call the police department and fire department and ask them what we should do. And I said, no, tell her we need to go into code gray. We need to go into code gray right now. And then this house supervisor was a lot smarter than that other. She said, okay. And then we paged it, and then I started doing, what I could do and what I had to do. And what at least someone had just a short distance away was a microburst. Everybody thought at the beginning that it was a tornado, and I'd never heard of microburst before. So anyway, this has gone way too long, and I'm not sure if I accomplished anything or not. So if I gave you some interesting information, or if you liked it, or give me a thumbs up. If you think I'm a blowhard that talks too long or whatever, give me some thumbs down, I guess. Thanks for watching this video.